to new audience, so I hope you watch it and share it, because it does a very excellent job of explaining how our world has been controlled, who's doing it, and why they're doing it, and I hope you enjoy.
The rich would much rather we didn't think at all, and certainly not about the wise words of the columnist Claire Rayner, who once famously said that the only reason we now have to live under kings and queens and presidents is that in past ages their ancestors were the best thieves. In the Middle Ages, when the king was feeling greedy and wanted to pay for a new mistress or grand new palace, he simply sent out his robber barons to steal half the herd of every local farmer, and if they complained, the robber barons would say the king needed to feed the army, or some similar excuse. That is how it was done then. But today, the ruling class face a different problem. We now live in an industrial age, and as George Orwell explains in his novel 1984, if the machine age was directed solely with the intention of making the common people physically comfortable, in a mega-productive, computer-controlled epoch, we could soon all live like millionaires. But think what this would mean. If we're all millionaires, we all fly first class. So the king and the queen and the president have to wait in a queue with everyone else. And do you honestly believe the Queen of England would wait in a queue behind you? If we're all millionaires, we all play golf. The king and the president can't get on the course, and there's no room on their exclusive beach. Orwell himself would have said the most important single sentence in 1984 was this one: if it once became general, wealth would confer no distinction. Our lords and masters are not going to wait in queues with the rest of us. So the special problem which fat cats face today is how to keep the wheels of industry turning, because as Orwell explains, the oligarchs have to make use of the masses without significantly raising the general standard of living. This is a more sophisticated age, so the robber barons need a more sophisticated means of stealing most of the wealth and of keeping most of the common people in poverty. What the rich face today is a situation in which the common people spend most of their lives on a 9-to-5 treadmill. They make things in factories, they grow things and harvest them, they teach in the schools, nurse in the hospitals, and as a result of their daily labours, a huge mountain of money is produced. Now the rulers have a problem. How can they keep the ordinary people hard at work so they're too exhausted at the end of every day to think about whether this is a fair system? The solution, as Sam Giancana explained, is to invent a foreign enemy, a boogeyman, who wants to conquer the whole world. This becomes a perfect excuse to make people pay for a sophisticated array of increasingly expensive weapons, which are made by companies which the fat cats themselves own. And in one neat little scam, the modern robber baron has a means of stealing most of the wealth produced by Western society, while leaving the common people with just enough crumbs to keep them going. Every year, America's oligarchs take $3 trillion out of the United States economy.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
This is how the rich have rigged the system, so that it benefits them at the expense of everyone else all the time. But in order to keep this fraud going, the public must always be convinced of the need for military expenditure. This is where all the phony terrorism comes in. And if we want to find out who is behind this ongoing hoax, we only have to look at Securicom, the company in charge of World Trade Center security, who removed all guards and sniffer dogs from the buildings on September 10th, so that the charges which brought down the towers in controlled explosions could be planted. If we now ask, who is the chief of Securicom, who do we find? Marvin P. Bush, brother of George W. Bush, son of the man who orchestrated the plot to assassinate President Kennedy, and grandson of the man who made the family fortune from Auschwitz slave labour. The Bush family and their rich friends have been behind all of it. During his time as president, George W. Bush connived with Tony Blair to introduce a deliberate policy of allowing unbalanced and aggressive Muslims to flood into Western countries. They did this in the hope that they would commit atrocities in their adopted countries, and they were actually delighted when the Washington DC sniper and the Fort Hood shootings made headlines, because they knew such events would make it easier for the public to swallow the idea that 9/11 was simply more typical Islamic terrorism. The truth is that Islam is simply being used like a pawn on a chessboard in a game the fat cats have been playing since World War I. 70 years ago, they gave us what they called their Hitler Project. 50 years ago, it was the JFK assassination project. Today we're having to suffer the War on Terror project. And when this current lunacy is over, they'll have another excuse ready to create yet another phony war and yet another patsy. If George Orwell was still alive today, and he was asked to comment upon all the significant political events of the last decade, it's quite likely he would simply restate the Orwellian definition of totalitarianism, to wit, a society living by and for continuous warfare, in which the ruling caste have ceased to have any real function but succeed in clinging to power through force and fraud, and then ask whether this sounds like the world we live in. Because it ought to be obvious by now that our seemingly endless economic recessions are being deliberately orchestrated. In today's world, the commodities markets are arranged in such a way that the price of virtually everything, particularly food, hardly ever changes. So how then can it be that the price of oil increased tenfold in the last decade? Economists are now tacitly agreeing that this was due to financialization, which is just a fancy way of saying rich creeps like the Bush family and their merchant banking friends used their trillionaire fortunes to rig the market. Why did they do this? Because great entrepreneurs like Stelios, with their budget air travel, had managed to break the cartel of the major airlines. Ordinary working families had begun living a jet-set lifestyle. The ruling elite of the entire world was simply terrified, because a jet-set lifestyle is supposed to be the exclusive preserve of the rich. What would happen to their social status if the whole world were part of the jet-set? So the rich arranged for the credit crunch, and now working families who used to fly 10 times a year can't even afford to use their car. What George Orwell understood better than anyone is that every age is basically the same. It is always a story in which a small elite group of greedy people cling to unjust power and privileges by practicing an ongoing deception upon their followers. Caesar did it with bread and circuses in the Roman arena. George Bush did it with false flag terrorism on 9/11. British newspapers have told their readers that the Queen of England is only the 10th richest person in the UK with a fortune of £3 billion. But experts who have calculated her real wealth reckon that her ownership of 1/6 of all the land on planet Earth puts her true fortune nearer to 22 trillion. And they also estimate the true wealth of the Queen's merchant bankers, the Rothschilds, the people who started all of this greed by lending money to the Harrimans and the Morgans, to be at least 100 trillion. So finally, we have to ask, what is to be done about all this? For in the case of America, it is obvious that in order to honour the memory of President Kennedy, Americans are now duty-bound to finish his work by finally ending the worldwide tyranny of the CIA. The time has come for ordinary Americans to ask their strong men in uniform just exactly what and who they think they are defending. And they better not take too long about it. Having established Islam in the West in order to provide us with an enemy, the elite have recently started on the second phase of their master plan, which is to wipe out anyone who is sick or disabled. In Britain, this has been manifest in the Atos scandal, which has stopped all welfare payments to people with terminal illnesses and allowed invalids who in some cases have no limbs to starve to death. The extermination of anyone considered feeble-minded or infirm was exactly how the Nazi regime began, and now they've started doing it again. What most amazes me in all of this is the naivety of the good people in the truth movement, who go on and on and on saying they want an independent inquiry. The Bush family and their rich friends are not going to investigate themselves. And there isn't any authority on earth above that of the ruling class, so it's never going to happen. These people have got the police and the judges and the justice system completely under their control. The Queen of England cannot be prosecuted for anything, not even genocide, in a Crown Court, because the Crown Courts are hers. She owns British justice.
The only way to change our corrupt system is through revolution. Everyone has to sign up to the Revolution Now website. And then the people have to march on Washington, just as they did for CIA agent Barack Obama's inauguration. Only this time, they need to kick him and every other crooked politician out and take power genuinely for the people's sake. And once again, they better not take too long about it, because the last time the rich decided to play a really big trick on the world,
Very